Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation podcast. Here with your host, Matt Lonsberry, and my co host, Aiden Mulcrone. Aiden, we've had about 24 hours, a little under 24 hours now to kind of reflect on Michigan State's loss to Maryland yesterday. It was homecoming. It was kind of, I thought, a better measuring stick of maybe where this program is at, as opposed to, Washington, who's a bona fide top 10 team and was a really tough opponent to play right out of the gate, after, struggling through the initial shock of the whole Mel Tucker situation. I thought this was a better measuring stick. And to be honest, I mean, the score was pretty lopsided at 31-9, but the game itself, I didn't feel like it was that lopsided. Michigan State, outgained Maryland. They were able to pressure Talia Tagovailoa, like we kind of talked about a little bit in the week leading up, but just some crucial mistakes with turnovers and red zone miscues, and that's kind of how a game gets away. So I guess what's your initial reaction, or maybe not initial reaction, but after having a night to sleep on it and reflecting a little bit, what are your thoughts on what we saw last night from the Spartans, and where do you think this team's at going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't see it as humiliating as the Washington game was
Sure.
for them. Especially just that whole week was very much so just a lot of issues. But this week it did seem like they took a step in the right direction towards improvement, but you could still tell like they're way behind on where they need to be in order to kind of reach their goals and what we predicted for them. They're still way
Sure.
behind. So I mean, obviously with everything going on, that's not completely their fault, but at the same time, there has been talks of how focused they are and the level of commitment from the players, but it's hard to see that be like in its entirety, because they still lost the game and pretty convincingly. And while they did have more yards than Maryland, there are a lot of other factors
Sure.
that play into maybe the reason why and such. So, but yeah, I mean, I think we did talk about how it was a bit of a mismatch just in terms of Maryland's pass offense versus MSU's pass defense. It did get exposed, and the fact that Maryland has a strong pass offense. Michigan State, it looked like they schemed for it, and it looks like they learned their lesson about giving up big plays against Washington, and they didn't really give up very many big plays, but that did open up, Maryland's running game, and
Right.
they had a lot of running, gaps that, their running back Hemby, he hit a lot of holes and made some big first downs just off that. So, Maryland had a good counter for MSU's game plan, and it was a convincing win. And yeah.
So I think there were a couple things that kind of jump out. Like, Harlan Barnett did talk about there was Michigan State had 11 penalties a week ago against Washington, 6 in this game against Maryland. They did seem to come at some crucial time, so there's still some things to clean up there for sure. But maybe there was a little bit better of a focus this week, a little bit more normalcy this week. Maybe that's reflected a little bit in the penalty situation. I mean, I will say, like, Michigan State did have some defensive starters out. This isn't an excuse making segment or anything like that, but I think it's important to point out, Charles Brantley didn't play, Jacoby Windman didn't play, Chris Bogle didn't play. And I felt like this, and I said this in the press box, I feel like this game mirrored last year's game between Michigan State and Maryland, where, Michigan State kind of gets punched in the mouth early, like they fell behind. was it 21-0 or 14-0 for sure, but maybe they got a
Yeah.
field goal in there before it was 21-0. But you fall behind. Defense played better in the second half, similar to the game last year. It's just they could not get out of their own way offensively with the turnovers. And even like Noah Kim kind of came up lame after a sack that he took and kind of hobbled off the field. Caden Hauser goes in, leads an impressive drive. You get down in the red zone and they call a little screen. He overthrows Nathan Carter and it's another interception. So like, it's even one of those hard things to point at. It's like, yeah, it's time to make a quarterback change, which maybe it is. But at the same time, like, Caden Hauser, critical error, similar to, some critical errors earlier in the game by Noah Kim. So there's, I guess there's no clear answer, as I guess is what I'm trying to make there. I will say about like you mentioned pass defense and limiting the big play. They did hold Tago Bailoa under 60% completion. He was 21 of 36. That's right around 58%. 223 passing yards, which is lower than I think either one of us anticipated into the game. So there was some marketed improvement in those areas. It's just that when your offense is giving the ball away and giving the opponent short fields, like the opening drive interception from Kim was returned to right around midfield. Nathan Carter has a fumble on Michigan State's side of the field, and Maryland cashes that in for a touchdown as well. So when those type of things happen, it's kind of a, not to quote Mel Tucker because obviously I don't really want to, but he did talk a lot about how it's a small margin for error that the program has had over the last couple of years. And that kind of came to fruition in this game, is that you have to play clean football, just where they're at talent wise. I think they do have some talent, but you have to play clean in order to give yourself a chance to win. And 5 turnovers just isn't going to get the job done there. So disappointing result. And I guess now is where we really find out about how bought in the team really is, because we're 4 weeks in, and this is when the guys who have not burned a red shirt could potentially burn a red shirt this year, because you get to play in 4 before you not burn a red shirt. I meant utilize a red shirt is what I mean. But you can play in 4 games before you're ineligible to redshirt. So we'll find out some more this week. Any other thoughts about the game before we kind of get into some of the things that we predicted very inaccurately?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really cost them the game was the red zone. Like,
Yes.
in the red zone, I mean, 4 red zone trips, and they scored a total of 9 points. So,
Right.
I mean, do the math there. That's 2.25 points per red zone trip. So that's not the most promising thing. That is an issue. And you have a turnover. Your first 3 drives are an interception, a turnover on downs, and then a fumble. So that definitely hurts as well. And like you said, there's talent on this team, and it's clear that there is talent, but at the same time, it's they keep shooting themselves in the foot, and that's really really costing them. And that it comes down to a handful of plays, and those handful of plays could be the difference. And so I mean, they scored. It was what, 30, it finished 31-9, but you could tell that it was 21 to, or when MSU scored the touchdown, it was 24-9. And they had the ball, they were driving down the field, so they had an opportunity to cut it to a 1-score game. And then it's just kind of, it just comes down to 3 or 4 plays that you can look at make all the difference.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, JR Jr. is asking about that first interception. I think Trey Mosley was open early in the route, and I don't know if Noah didn't see him right away, or if he maybe second guessed it and then he threw late over the middle, which is kind of a cardinal sin. You never want to do that. and Maryland's safety. I think it was a safety just stepped in front of the route and picked it off. But like Mosley was open early. It was just that he was late with the ball. So that's kind of what happened there. I also think JR made a good point about, and you pointed this out too, is like, Maryland had one drive. I think it was 11 plays, 95 yards, their second drive or something similar to that. And the short fields were the result of a lot of their other scoring drives. I think that first drive they still had to go, I don't know, 60 or so yards after the interception, but it was a tough way to start the game. Michigan State had picked up a couple first downs. They've got maybe get into a little bit of a rhythm. We talked about slow starts from the offense over the last 3 weeks. Got a couple first downs early, and then you throw the pick. That can be a bit demoralizing. And then the third touchdown off of the fumble, that was the most like egregious. Like I think you had a really short field. There was a bad punt from Michigan State that set Maryland up at, I think, Michigan State's 32, and they held them to a field goal there. But that's you're gifting away 3 points there. To your point about the red zone, with 4 red zone trips, you'd think the minimum amount of points you should get is 12. That's 4 field goals. And that nobody even wants that, but like that should be the minimum.
Right.
Maximized, that's 28 points. That's 4 touchdowns. So to only come up with 9, that just speaks to the point you made about the red zone there. So Gregory Clark points out the defense and Nathan Carter. I thought the defense was put in a bad spot early on, again, specifically that Carter fumble. It's hard to say because you made a good point about the total yards, because as I said in the press box too, 3 of those times the end zone is what stopped Maryland. It wasn't Michigan State's defense. So, you got to take that into account. But I did think in the second half, Michigan State's defense played really well. Which again, it just reminded me of last year's game against Maryland, because it was a similar situation with that. I don't know what that means for the future. Because I think we kind of maybe tried to make that point last year. Oh yeah, maybe there's something to build on here. Well, maybe there is, but at the same time, we've seen a lot of the same reoccurring issues. So you got to prove it to me at this point that you're going to build on it. Kyle mentioned the coaching. We'll get to that a little bit later because it does pertain to one of my burning questions.
Yeah.
So, just want to we welcome questions as always. I can star them and we can get back to them. So we'll keep things rolling here. And I think we'll do it by kind of reviewing our predictions going into the game. We both had Maryland winning this game, but we had Michigan State being a little bit more competitive. But I think with taking the turnovers into account, kind of explains that. My prediction for the score was 30-23 in favor of Maryland. Came close with Maryland's score. We both did. Yours was 28-20. So like we're both within a couple points for Maryland. Had their offensive production pegged fairly well. But again, Michigan State was very capable of scoring 23 or 20 points in this game. But again, the red zone miscues. As far as bold predictions, and these are obviously like, if we're going 3 for 3 on bold predictions, we're probably not being very bold. And so we typically don't get these right, but that's kind of what makes it fun. You're taking a shot in the dark. And so just keep that in mind. I had Jordan Hall forcing a turnover. That didn't happen. But Michigan State did come up with an interception in the red zone. I also had Christian Fitzpatrick leading Michigan State in receiving yards. He had 2 on the day. So, picked the wrong. Montori Foster, a great game for him. He did drop what should have been a touchdown at the end of the half, so an unfortunate drop there. But he had a strong day with 6 catches for 67 yards. Malik Carr had 5 catches for 53 yards. You predicted that he'd get it in the end zone. He didn't, but still a pretty solid day for Malik. I had Michigan State intercepting Tagovailoa at least once. That one did come to pass. Michigan State's defense getting 2 sacks. That was one of yours. They did get some pressure. Weren't able to get Tagovailoa on the ground. And I will get into that as well with my burning questions. And then you had Noah Kim playing the whole game, which This is obviously another big
Yeah.
topic of discussion that we will get into, and I think it does beg the question: if he doesn't, come up lame the one time, does he stay? Interesting. We'll get into that with our burning questions a little bit, but obviously, Katenhauser and Sam Leavitt both played a little bit last night as well. So,
Right.
with that, any thoughts on those predictions or any final thoughts on the game before we move into burning questions, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered it all. Of the things I do want to talk about, I do have in my burning questions, so we can jump into that if you want.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump into it. I will give you the floor to open us up with burning questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the comments, reading a lot of the comments in here, do pertain to some of my burning questions. So I'll just get to the first burning question in terms of where should we either expect or kind of what is recruiting look like? Because we did see last night that Cameron Campbell, defensive back out of Florida, decommitted. There's still, with him decommitting, and there was another decommitment last week. I can't remember who it was, but there's this small class that it was topped out at 13 guys right now, or so far, but it's getting smaller and smaller by the day. You keep seeing um you know AJ Dennis, who is one of the biggest commits in this class. He's getting offers from
Mhm.
Penn State. I saw him get an offer from, I think, Colorado and another Pac-12 team who's going to be somewhere else next year. So where, you know, what can MSU do? Like, how can they save this recruiting class from, just completely falling off a cliff?
It's going to be really hard because the guys in charge of recruiting guys, they have no stability right now. Like they
Mhm.
don't have a leg to stand on because they don't know if they're going to be here in 6 months' time.
Mhm.
So it's really hard to. I mean, typically that first recruiting class of a new regime is rated lower just because there's not enough time to build relationships and you can sell hope. Like a new regime can kind of sell hope and a vision for this is what we're going to do and get players to buy into that. But for a staff that just doesn't have a leg to stand on, I think it's going to be really difficult, maybe even next to impossible. Now that's not to say that they're going to lose all of their commits, because there are certain guys who are either from the area, like a Nick Marsh, who had his, like, one of the reasons why he committed to Michigan State was he wanted to play in front of his family, and that's not going to change. Like Michigan State is going to be in East Lansing next year. We know that, so
Mhm.
that doesn't change. Now he also got an offer from Colorado that I saw within the last couple of weeks. Penn
Mhm.
State's been maybe Michigan State's top competition for Nick Marsh through this cycle. Pitt got involved too, but they're not off to a great start either this year. So I think Penn State still remains maybe that top contender for Nick Marsh. But yeah, it's really difficult because when these coaches are on the phone, they can't sell security to these players. They can't say, hey, this is how you're going to be used, because they just don't know if they're going to be around. So I think it's really difficult. I don't think Campbell will be the first or will be the last guy to decommit from this class. So it's like I don't know how you do that at this point. I think it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, part of what, Tucker did, when he was first hired was, find, a couple guys from that previous regime who, can keep enough recruits or keep enough guys who are on the team currently at MSU and prevent them from entering the transfer portal. And, retention rate is got to be, that's one of the most important things right now for any coaching job that's up. just because of how crazy the portal can get. I mean, we saw Colorado, how much their turnover was. You know, there's some programs I'm thinking of one in my head that I'm blanking out on, but yeah, just the retention rate. I do have a couple coaches in my head who I think they will keep. I think Harlan Barnett is got to be kind of number one, just because he's the interim guy. Because it seems that the reason why he was chosen as the interim is because the players believed in him and really like him. I think Courtney Hawkins is another guy. I think there's a lot, from the 4 years that we've seen. I think I'm pretty comfortable saying he's the best position coach on this staff, in terms of what we've seen in productivity and development from these players. I think those two guys, who are also Michigan State alums, is another key factor, that those two guys will be kept. I think I'm confident saying that they'll be kept on the next staff. And then, once the next staff gets settled in, maybe, whether they phase out or not, that's a whole different discussion. But I think, those two guys on offense and defense really keep MSU from, falling off a complete cliff in terms of retention.
Yeah, that was actually one of my burning questions was, will any of these Michigan State coaches be retained by the next staff? And that's kind of a tough thing to answer, because obviously when you bring a guy in, you should hand the keys over and let him make his decisions. But I do think you make a good point with Courtney Hawkins, because if there is a guy who has produced or recruited well, developed well, and gotten guys to the next level, which is that's what high school players, that's what they dream of doing, going somewhere where they're going to be developed, they're going to improve, they're going to be productive, and then they're going to go get drafted. And that's what Courtney Hawkins has done here. And so if there is a position coach who's been, I don't want to say above reproach, but like certainly had been on the upper echelon, he would be that guy. Harlan's an interesting one because he is a Michigan State guy through and through. He was here through the heights of the Mark D'Antonio era. So, he has that connection. At the same time, the secondary has struggled. And I think I'm certainly not putting all of that on Harlan, but he is one of the coaches back there. So there's going to be a bit of a stigma about that. So I am interested to see what that looks like and obviously it'll come down to whoever gets hired eventually here. But for a while, I thought, that Chris Kapilovich would continue to was a potential option to continue at O-line. I don't know anymore. I really don't, because as well as, his reputation about, being a builder and things like that, it just hasn't really come together very well so far in East Lansing. And it does take, offensive line is probably the single most difficult position to build depth and be like a high-end unit for a college program. It's very difficult. So I don't want to take anything away from that, but I just feel like a head coach probably wants to bring in their O-line guy, because that's one of your most important staff hires. So that's kind of what my thoughts are with him. You kind of already gave your answer, so we can kind of move on to another burning question since we covered that one. So go ahead and hit me with your second one.
This one kind of another thing where it's like I have to ask it. So it's, how different is this game without kind of everything that's gone on the last 2 weeks? Is this a completely different game if Tucker is still the coach? Like, I feel like that's a reasonable question to ask. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think last week I felt pretty strongly that regardless of him being on the sideline or not, the outcome was going to be the outcome. Because I think Washington was just that much better than Michigan State. I'm going to pull up one of our audience questions because it kind of pertains to this a little bit. But Steve asked, how does this team look in year 4 of Tucker's regime? And I think it's safe to say it's not where any of us expected it to be. It's certainly after that 2021 year where you have all that momentum, all the good vibes, and you just weren't able to just frankly didn't capitalize on it. And injuries were part of the problem last year, but the team depth and things like that. And I think there's been some good points about this coaching staff just hasn't lived up to what they were billed to be, and so there's a lot of different factors. To get back to your question, though, it's hard to say because Tucker isn't a play caller. He's not on either side of the ball. He wasn't the player caller. Defensively, we talked about this a little bit. I thought Michigan State adjusted well and played pretty well in the second half. And I just don't know how much of an impact he makes on the offensive side of things. So maybe it's a little cleaner. Maybe the operation runs a little bit more smoothly. Obviously, like Tucker would be the one talking to Jay Johnson about, okay, this is what I'm looking for here, and maybe in those red zone situations. But I don't know. I don't think it looks a whole lot different just because he's not involved in the play calling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you where, maybe those turnovers get cleaned up, or, maybe they get an extra stop like here or there, but it still seems like Maryland would have won the game, and I know MSU had more yards and everything, but the field position, that's a big factor. Like the punter not flipping the field, everything like that. So, yeah, having great field position for Maryland definitely helped them. And like you said earlier, the only thing that stopped them from some of those drives was the end zone. And so, you think about it, you look at kind of the drives they had, and they had a 45-yard drive. They had like a 37-yard drive, but they also had, I think they had like a 90-yard drive too. So, I mean, you factor that in. I think this game, yeah, like you said, I think this game might be a little bit closer, but it still seems like Maryland would have come out on top.
Yeah, let's answer a few audience questions, and then I'll get into my next burning question. We can kind of go through these quickly. Steven asks, how do you keep the true freshmen, highly rated kids from hitting the portal? Again, it's a tough sell because the guys who are doing the convincing don't know if they're going to be here. It's really going to come down to what were the reasons that these guys chose to come to Michigan State. If it was tied in with, trusting this coaching staff and wanting to play for this coaching staff, a good relationship with their position coach, that bodes trouble because there's a fair chance or a good chance that position coach is no longer going to be here. If it was more about, playing in the Big Ten, competing against some of the best teams in the country, and certainly in the Midwest, and now you're bringing in some West Coast, and there was just a love for Michigan State, then you have certainly a higher chance of keeping some guys. So it's going to come down to, the reasons why those kids chose to come. And then the second factor will be when you do make a head coaching hire and that guy comes in and addresses the team, how good of a job do they do of selling the guys who are here to stay? But also every new staff is going to weed through, this guy doesn't fit what we're trying to do, either schematically or personality wise or whatever. So there's a lot of different factors. It's going to be tough. But I think the majority of it is going to come down to whatever staff is next. That's my thoughts on this. Anything to add, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, there's no right or wrong answer for, the reason why these players, came to MSU, because there's a bunch of different factors. Not everyone grows up an MSU fan that goes to MSU. Some do, some don't. Yeah, like if it's coaching staff and relationships, that's a factor. Like you said, I mean, location, just, the campus atmosphere, family, there's a million different factors as to why players go where they go. So I think, yeah, like I said, I think the assistants and kind of why Harlan Barnett and Courtney Hawkins are two important coaches on this staff right now at the moment. And then, into the future are, again, like factors, to help the retention rate, whether or not, these guys are going to enter the transfer portal or not. And then, obviously they're not in a a place to compete for the Big Ten, and even with an expanded playoff, they do not look like they're in a
No,
level to even compete for a 12 team playoff. So
it's going to
just
be a
with that,
while.
yeah. So with that in mind, you do think of, a guy like Keon Coleman leaving to take, to go to a school that, is in the playoff race right now and potentially the national championship race. So you think about that and you look at, some of their younger players like Jerron Glover, who, is a 6'3" kind of walking mismatch esque player who has some parallels to Keon Coleman as a redshirt freshman. And you look at him, and you're like, he looks like he could gain some interest from, one of the top 12 teams in the country. And maybe that's what he wants, is he wants to compete for a national championship. Again, the motives for players are all different, and there's no right or wrong answer. So yeah, it's definitely a case by case.
Yeah, I want to answer this one just kind of briefly. Gregory asked about the coaching situation. I think what our expectation is at this point that, Harlan Burnett is the interim coach. He'll coach for the rest of the year. I expect this staff to be in place for the rest of the year. But we do anticipate a new head coach next year. We've put out some names on our Facebook page, some articles that Aiden wrote, his top three kind of candidates for the Power Five, and then some group of five options. Probably do some more of those kind of. It's kind of like some coaching profiles, really. Like this is who this guy is. This is what he's done. You're probably going to see a lot of those over the next couple of weeks, because that is the reality of the situation. Is that there's probably going to be a mostly, if not entirely, new coaching staff next year. Move on to Stephen did ask about Noah Kim. I think a lot of what we've seen from him is what you get with guys who are making some of their first career starts. I don't know that he's trusting what he's seeing on the field right now. And if that's the case, that would explain, kind of why he's late on a few throws. There's definitely maybe a chemistry issue a little bit with the receivers too. Doesn't seem, because there's a lot of instances where it seems like, he's either overthrowing guys or throwing to a spot where there's not a guy. And so there is it seems like some miscommunication. That comes down to coaching. Because I know Noah was out throwing with guys, throughout the summer, and things like that. So I think that pertains to maybe some coaching stuff. And then just repetition and getting reps in with guys. I think that plays into that as well. I'm going to look for any other. This was an interesting question from Steve, asking about, a bowl game this year, and is that more attractive or less attractive for the next coach? I don't think it factors in a whole lot. Obviously, I just think that whatever coach comes in, they're gonna make this their program. And so, yeah, you want to retain some of the talent from the previous regime, but from that head coach's perspective, he's starting in a new spot. From a fan's perspective, hey, this is what we've gone through, and so there's a difference there. And so I don't think it factors in a whole lot. Do you have any other thoughts on this specific question, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the NFL where you just can bottom out to get like a top 5 draft pick. So I think every game in college football is important, and you want to win every game. And I think that's a big attraction for the reason why everyone loves college football. So I think, that's a factor. So as coaches, Harlan Barnett talked about, he hates losing more than he likes winning. And, coaches are competitors too. So, you see that. And I think what the head coach or, when they do their coaching searches, the candidates, what they're going to look for is, MSU is a big program. You've seen success here within the last decade. The questions are how much talent is still left on this team, and I think there's a lot of kind of just what's going to happen with these off the field issues. Like, how is that going to be, looming around when the new staff gets here, or is that going to be wiped clean, and people will be held accountable and for everything. So I think they're going to look at kind of just the athletic department as a whole, and then look at what talent is going to be left on this team. And I think those are the two biggest factors right now. And if that's cleaned up by November, December, when they go do their coaching searches, I think that's going to attract more candidates.
All right, let's get back to our burning questions at this point. I think it was my turn when we started answering a few audience questions, but this pertains more to you've had a couple big picture questions. This one's more about the game itself and this season. So once again, last night, Michigan State had 7 quarterback hurries on Tagovailoa. This comes after 9 against Michael Penix Jr. the week before, but also for the second straight week, 0 sacks with those hurries. So I guess my question to you, Aiden, is that are you encouraged by the pressure that's being generated, or is that more frustrating that you're not quite getting home?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the fact that they are getting these pressures, and I think they're getting these pressures, I think that's a positive to look at, because last year they couldn't even get pressure sometimes. So I think that's a positive to look at, but obviously you want to hit home on some of these and rack up some sacks. But the last 2 games, Mike Penix and Talia Tagovailoa, they have good pocket presence, and they're not really, Mike Penix is not a runner by any means. He likes to sit in the pocket, and Tagovailoa, he can beat you with his feet, but again, he likes to sit in the pocket. So both of those guys have quick releases. They're established quarterbacks for their team. Both of them have started Tagovailoa started for Maryland for 3 years now, and Mike Penix has started for Washington for 2 years, but has been a full-time starter since he was at Indiana since 2019. So it's been those are experienced guys. So you're kicking yourself that you didn't get the sacks, but at the same time, the pressure does, that is a positive takeaway in a sense.
Yeah, I think the point about Michael Penix Jr. and Talia Tagovailoa, they have the ability to extend plays with their legs. Like they're not dual threat guys per se, but they have the ability. They're mobile and to be able to extend plays. I think where it helps you is going into this next game against Iowa, because that's not who Cade McNamara is. And we saw, if anybody watched the way Penn State smacked Iowa last night, they got a lot of pressure in the backfield. Iowa's offensive line is not what we've come to expect when we say Iowa offensive line over these last few years. They haven't been up to snuff. And so that's where that pressure can start to turn into sacks, is because, McNamara is not that kind of a quarterback who extends plays. Now, he does do a pretty good job of getting the ball out quick, and that's what Iowa will try to do, because they have no vertical threat. on their team. It's all about getting the ball out quick in the passing game, hitting the tight ends for 5 to 6 yards. It seems like, and that's their offense, and it's not very creative, and it's not very good. So that's where I think we can really if you don't get sacks next week against Cade McNamara, that's where I think the more it becomes more frustrating. But I will say at this point, I'm leaning toward more encouraging than frustrating. So we'll see what that looks like next week. All right. I think you've got a few more, Aiden, so hit me with another one.
All right. So this one can kind of, just from the sample size that we've seen this year, should we be concerned about special teams? I think that's a question that people don't really look at. I mean, we saw the kicking game with Jonathan Kim. We've only seen him have a handful of field goals, but he's done well. They did have that one blocked against Maryland, but he has shown that he is accurate when it's not blocked. But the kickoff return has not been that great. The punting has not been great. And that really affected the field position for last game. That could be a game changer. So I mean, what's your level of concern there?
It kind of depends on that position, because I do think I think Jonathan Kim has kind of solidified that kicker role, and the one got blocked against Maryland, but that's not on the kicker. Sometimes it's a low line drive and it's easy to block, but typically that's more on the protection. So I still feel good about him. They've been rotating punters between Ryan Eckley and Michael O'Shaughnessy. I think I would just ride with Eckley at this point. I think I would. Not that he's been a world beater by any stretch of the imagination or anything like that, but I think he's been better. I mean, it's funny because I don't always pay attention to who is out there punting. Typically, you pay attention if something goes wrong. And last night it was Michael O'Shaughnessy with a 22-yard effort I don't know if it was the third or fourth quarter, but it was in the second half. And so you mostly notice when things go wrong. I agree with you on kick return. It hasn't been very dynamic, explosive. Alante Brown has had a really rough go of it back there. First, he gets beat up, or he gets knocked out of the game briefly against Central Michigan, takes the big hit, and then last night he's going backwards and catching the ball in the end zone and bringing it out, and then ends up fumbling. So rough go of it for him back there. So I guess to make it a succinct answer, I think I'm ready to move off of Ross Ells as the special teams coordinator. I think it goes back to that, because it doesn't seem like it's come together very well under his, and maybe this is too much blame to place on one guy for a wide range of things, but he is the special teams coordinator, so the buck stops with him. So that would be my answer. I feel okay about Jonathan Kim. Not sure about the whole operation of the way special teams is run.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Harlan Barnett talked about finding guys to give the team a spark last night. And kickoff return and kind of punt return the last couple of years with Jaden Reed back there. He could give that offense a spark, and
right.
You really don't see it at all. And I think that's important. And I feel like special teams has been swept under the rug a little bit, just because of the level of concern on offense and defense. So
yeah,
I think it has been swept under the rug a little bit, but it showed big time against Maryland, and I think that that's going to start raising some questions besides people like me. So yeah,
sure. Just a couple questions that we can kind of get out of the way here. Kyle asked about the budget for the next coach. I haven't seen anything float around in there. I mean, certainly Michigan State is they're doing fine financially, and the Big Ten, the television money is going to afford them the ability to pay top dollar for a coach. So nothing specific. I would be surprised if they aren't very competitive, I will say,
Mhm.
with whatever they're offering, the next coach. But it also comes down to, the type of guy who you can, I don't want to say lure, but I'll use that because a better word's not coming to me. But the type of guy you can lure to East Lansing, what that going to take, what is their prestige? You pay for prestige, so I think all of that factors in to that. And then Gregory asked about Jordan Hall. I think he's been as advertised, and that's a huge compliment. I think he has been everything that the coaching staff thought when they saw him, everything that he has built up to be in his recruiting ranking, things like that. I think he's been really good, and I would love to see him get more. Continue to get more, because I feel like he has gotten more playing time as the games have gone on. I think that there's no reason for me to believe that won't continue. So very impressed with him. All right, moving on to another of my burning questions. So Michigan State's running game, they only finished with 102 yards on the ground, which is right around that average number that I talked about when Kenneth Walker hasn't been on the field over the last 4 years. I think they average 104 coming into this game, so it's right there. I will say I think they gave up 3 sacks, and a few of those were big losses. So once again, Nathan Carter just under 100 yards. He finished with 97. So I guess my question to you, Aiden, is, the running performance that we saw from Carter, and there were a few drives there where it did seem like Michigan State's offensive line got some better push up front. So my question is that a sign of things to come, or was it fool's gold?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, I think another part of the rushing game was the screen game. They did try to utilize Carter in some of those screens. So, you know, I wouldn't say it's fool's gold. Um, but I thought they were definitely an improvement from Washington, because it was hard to get
Yeah.
worse. But Nathan Carter, he has shown that he is an explosive player. It's just finding those gaps to get him, that space to run the ball. So I think for the remainder of the season and moving forward, it's still gonna be hard to get him going and get him in kind of a rhythm. But at the same time, he does have the playmaking ability to still get you those 15 to 25 yard kind of big plays.
Yeah, no, I think Carter's been really good. There wasn't much running room against Washington in that game. I mean, that game was just a train wreck, pretty much start to finish. So we don't want to take too much from it. But no, I think they did get better push at times. The short yardage situations continue to be a struggle. And I think that plays into the red zone as well, because, the field condenses and it's harder to get that push. I didn't like the play call on 4th and goal from, I think, the 2, where you ran a kind of a stretch play to Carter. They're just not a good enough run blocking team to be able to pull that off and set the edge and then let your guy get in. So, but at the same time, I did want to note that there's some improvement. I have a hard time putting faith in it, just because we have not seen any consistency with that aspect of the game. So, all right, moving on to, I think you've got 2 more, Aiden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we kind of covered this question a little bit already, but it was just, did Kim do enough this game to keep his job, or was he, not bad enough to lose his job? I think I asked you this question after the game last night, but
we talked about this in the press box. And I don't remember who initiated it, but I think at one point I did turn to you and I kind of said something along those lines of, like, he hasn't been so horrible that, like, it's obvious that they need to make a change. And yet because he has suffered from some drop passes, and we saw it again last night where two really good balls on that last drive. It only would have resulted in one touchdown because it was on one drive, but two dropped touchdown passes. And at the same time, you have an overthrow of a guy who would have scored if you hit him in stride, and we saw that I think last week as well with there was a good design where they snuck, Carter onto the flats and he overthrew him. So it's been a kind of a mixed bag. And so it hasn't been this obvious answer. But I liked the point that you made in the elevator going back up to the press box. I don't know if you want to share that or not, but I think in fact, I would encourage you to go ahead and share that, or at least that perspective of, going into Iowa and what it means to go into Kinnick with a guy who has a few starts under his belt as opposed to a brand new guy. I would go ahead and share that with our audience.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had a thought of, people on Twitter, like reading people on Twitter's thoughts last night about, the potential of making a quarterback change. And kind of in my head, I was thinking, if you were to make that change, it would be against Rutgers and not Iowa. I think, if you throw Caden Hauser in as, and you just say, hey, Caden Hauser's a starter at Iowa, you're not giving him a lot of confidence to, you're just not giving him a lot of confidence because you're throwing him into a hostile situation. It's, their first road game of the year. It's a night game at one of the toughest environments to play in all of college football. I'll just say, there's not a lot of teams that go into Kinnick Stadium at night and win. That's not really a thing that's that happens. It's Iowa has a night game. It's going to be an Iowa game. They're going to win, whether it's voodoo magic or whether they just completely dominate you the whole time. They're going to win. So I think if you're going to make that change, it's got to be after the bye week. But yeah, I mean, like Harlan Barnett said, it does seem like they want to roll with Kim, like the team gets behind him. But if you were to make that change, it can't be against Iowa. It's got to be, you go to Iowa, you play the game, then you have your bye week to evaluate, hey, is Hauser putting us in a better position to win this game, or is Sam Levitt, does he have enough reps? Because obviously he came in the summer, so a little bit of short time, does he have enough reps to maybe give him a go, So I think that's kind of where I'd be at in terms of evaluating this quarterback situation, because, there is a little bit of, talk. I mean, actually, I'll stop. There's not a little bit. There's a lot of talk about whether Kim is still the guy. And in my opinion, I still believe that he deserves to be the starter. But at the same time, if you beg the question, that's kind of what I would say for the answer.
I think the first question after who's going to be the next head coach at Michigan State, I think the next biggest question is who should or will be the starter at quarterback. So I think that that's the very next question. I think your point about the bye week, I think, is the key here, because one of two things happen when you go to Iowa next week. It's a tough defense. So it gives Noah Kim every opportunity to prove again that he won the job for a reason. You go out and you perform well against a tough defense, and you kind of I don't want to say re-earn the job, but like solidify the job, and you solidify the confidence from your teammates and things like that. So that's option one. Or things don't go well, and we're in another situation where different guys are getting reps. And, Caden's getting the opportunity at the end of the game. Maybe even Sam's getting the opportunity at the end of the game. I'll focus on Caden because I think he's the more realistic one. But the bye week is key, because after Iowa, you can almost, if you're going to make the change, have like a mini fall camp, because you have 2 weeks You have, the 1 week of rest and recuperate. I'm sure there certainly will be some game prep for Rutgers during that initial bye week, but it's a chance to get back to what you're doing, kind of self-reflect a little bit, self-scout, and maybe clean up your own stuff. And then you have another week of preparation for Rutgers. So I agree with the timing there. If you're going to make a change, I agree with that whole timetable, and I think it's a good perspective to have going into Iowa, because obviously there's a lot of people already clamoring, make the change. The timing of it is important. So I thought it was a good point by you. Let's move on to, I think, my second to last. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. To be honest, I was trying to come up with different ones, and this one kind of came to mind, but it does pertain to Malik Carr. We heard a lot about Malik improving during fall camp, and I do think he's been better. But my question is, he seems to come off the field an awful lot in those red zone situations, and Michigan State has struggled in the red zone. So my question is, why is he coming off the field in the red zone, and does he need to be on the field in those situations?
Yeah, I think he does need to be on the field. I think that's important. Whether or not he's run blocking on the field in red zone situations, that's up to the coaching staff entirely. But I think regardless, he does need to be on the field, just even if he's out at receiver. So I think he's too talented to not have on the field at the time, because they need as many weapons as they can get. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, that's my exact thoughts too. He's one of your better offensive weapons. He's a mismatch. He's a tough cover for linebackers or safeties. So yeah, that's kind of been a puzzling question for me. I think I don't know, typically how this works is, in a week you get the head coach press media availability, and then later on in the week you get assistant coaches and players. Given everything that's going on around the program pertaining to Mel Tucker, that hasn't been the operation the last 2 weeks, which I totally get. But if we get back to a point where we're getting chances to ask questions of position coaches, if Ted Gilmore is put up on the podium or Jay Johnson is put up on the podium, I would love to be able to ask, okay, how come Malik Carr is not on the field at all times in those red zone situations? This last game they went to, Jalen Franklin, and I'm not trying to disparage him. I'm just pointing out that we saw at least split snaps between Carr and Franklin in the red zone. I think Franklin might have outnumbered Carr. And before Franklin, it was Tyneil Hopper down there, and that's he got hurt on a play that was in the red zone. So that would be my question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, if it does pertain to the run blocking thing, but yeah, that jumped to mind. All right, you have one more, Aiden, and then I'll hit you with my last one, and then we'll get out of here.
You actually, why don't you give me your last one, because my last one is a bit of a big question. So
all right. I wouldn't call this a big question. It's more, it's a question about this season so far. What spawned it was, I've heard some chatter from a few prominent college football analysts who kind of in passing have called Michigan State the worst team in the Big Ten, or potentially the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't think that's accurate. And I'm certainly not here to, play the theme song or anything, but like, out of the 14 Big Ten teams, where does Michigan State rank? Because I don't think
that was my question. That was my question. Okay. So we both have the same last question. All right. So yeah, mine was, is MSU the worst team in the Big Ten? So, yeah. So do you want me to go first? Or?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I don't believe they're the worst team in the Big Ten, and I'll list off the teams who I think are worse. Northwestern, I think, is worse. Now, they did just beat Minnesota, which I didn't know that happened. I was scrolling through scores last night, and that kind of took me by surprise. But I think they're better than Northwestern. I think they're better than Indiana. I think Indiana's really bad. There was another one. Shoot. I'm telling you, before the season started, I had positive vibes about Michigan State being able to go to Minnesota and beating the Gophers. Those have only, despite all of what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, I still feel good about that pick. And so I think they might be better than Minnesota. Not as strong a conviction there, but certainly they're better. I think they're better than Indiana. I think they're better than Northwestern. I think it's close with Illinois. I think it's close with Minnesota. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. Nebraska's kind of in that Minnesota, Illinois space. So to put a number on it, out of 14, I'll put them at 11.
Yeah. I think just situationally, I think right now I have Indiana I have Indiana worse. I have Nebraska worse than them. I think the Northwestern beating Minnesota last night kind of sparked my question, because I watched the overtime, and I thought to myself, I was like, you know what, Northwestern, they are not that good, but they do have that kind of, they do seem connected and focused, because they have a lot of off the field issues going on, and that happened earlier in the summer, and it didn't happen during the season, so it gave them time to kind of process what was happening with their coaching turnover that's going on, and their issues that they have. So they seem a little bit more together for that matter. So I don't know. I'd still take MSU over Northwestern too, but besides those three teams, I think they're on the same, like you said, I think they're on the same level as Rutgers right now. So that being on the road, that might be a lean towards Rutgers, but we'll see. We'll get there. When we get to Rutgers week. But yeah, I'd say 11 is probably where I'd have them as well. But there is a case for them to be, I wouldn't put them dead last, but there is a case for them to be 13. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you can make that case. I think it's important to remember, though, these last 2 weeks have not been good. Yeah. But Washington's a bona fide top 10 at worst team. Right. And they made you look really, really bad in a week that was, again, just a really bad time to welcome a top 10 team. Yeah. Maryland won eight games last year, 8 or 9 games last year. That's a solid team. Like I'm not gonna play Maryland's fight song either, but I think that's a pretty solid team. I think Mike Loxley's done a pretty good job there. So it's not like you went out and got beat by, well, for instance, Minnesota just lost to Northwestern. Where's that program at right now? I'm not sure. It's not like that. It's not like even Texas Tech is off to a 1-3 start this year. They lost to, I think, Wyoming,
West Virginia yesterday.
West Virginia. Too. So like, it's not like you're going out and losing to bad teams. I think both of the teams they've lost to, one is really, really good, firmly in the playoff discussion, and Maryland is pretty solid. So I think we have to see more. I think this week will be how I want to put this, similar to this last week as far as like the challenge, but going on the road adds some difficulty. And we know about Kinnick, we know about Iowa's defense. So, as Kyle points out, and I think they have higher than the 8th toughest schedule in the country. I had them as the second toughest schedule in the country. So, and I know some other people did too. So it's really tough schedule. I don't think it gets any easier per se this week at Iowa. Certainly they don't have the offense to challenge Michigan State the way either of these last two teams did. So I'm intrigued by that, but I'm also very questionable of, can Michigan State generate some offense next week? We'll get into that on Wednesday, one show at a time here. But I think we're in the same mold. I don't think they're the worst team in the Big Ten, but certainly discouraging what we've seen the last couple of weeks. With that, unless you have anything to add, Aiden.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, we'll find out, I guess, soon, whether or not, because they do play, Rutgers, Indiana,
Yep.
and Nebraska and Minnesota. So,
Right.
that will be very telling, and just kind of it's gonna be a week by week basis for this team in terms of what's going to come out in the future, kind of what's going to come out this week in terms of, are guys going to take red shirts or not,
Right.
are guys going to enter the portal. So yeah, we'll see. I think these next 2 weeks are just going to be really important in terms of just retention rate, and the wins and losses will probably magnetize that, or yeah.
I'm going to give our audience like one little glimmer of the light at the end of the tunnel here, and that is in about a month's time. Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartans will play their first exhibition game of basketball season. So we're about a month away from getting on the hardwood. So cling to that over these next couple of weeks. Again, we're not rushing through football season because as tough as it is for this fan base right now, understandably so. You and I both still have a love for college football, and so we will continue to enjoy that.
Yeah.
But also looking forward to getting back to the Breslin Center, because as we've discussed, I think Michigan State's in a really is poised to have a really good season there. So hold on to that hope as we go forward here. And thank you, as always, for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time.